When you plug in a wireless CarPlay adapter, you don't really think about what it's doing in the background. It just sits there, powered on, handling data, generating heat, and trying to stay stable at the same time. And depending on the design, some adapters handle that better than others. And believe it or not, one of the biggest reasons wireless CarPlay adapters fail long-term isn't software, it's heat. So we decided to take a closer look at what's really going on beneath the surface, comparing how different adapters manage heat over time, rather than just how fast they connect. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let's begin. Now, for this experiment, we're about to test these 4 wireless CarPlay adapters. We've got the Ottocast Mini on the far left, Ottocast Cube right beside that, the Carluex Pro Plus 2.0 after that, and then a non-branded wireless CarPlay adapter from AliExpress. The non-branded one was honestly a silly blind buy. We wanted to see how these non-branded ones perform under stress. So yeah, here it is. All 4 of these are popular in their own way, they sit in different price brackets, and more importantly, they all take very different approaches when it comes to casing size, materials, and internal layout. So the goal here isn't just to see which one gets hot, but how each of them behaves over time, how quickly they heat up, whether they stabilize, and how efficiently they cool down once power is removed. For measuring thermals, we're using this HF96V thermal camera from HSF Tools. It's a standalone thermal camera, so we don't have to rely on a phone or deal with cables and apps in between tests. At around $200, it's one of the more affordable dedicated thermal cameras you can buy right now, and for this kind of work, it just makes things simpler. We can point it, get a live thermal view instantly, and move from one adapter to the next without resetting anything. That consistency is really what matters here, since we're focused on comparing heat behavior rather than testing the camera itself. The thermal measurements we'll be mentioning here will be on Celsius. All 4 adapters were updated to their latest firmware before testing. We ran them outside of the car, in a controlled environment, plugged into a powered hub, so each unit was getting consistent power. Given the time of year and the fact that we're not dealing with extreme cabin heat right now, this isn't meant to simulate worst-case summer conditions. Instead, it gives us a more neutral baseline to compare how these adapters behave relative to each other. The first thing we did was an idle test. Each adapter was powered on and left running for around 20 minutes without any active interaction. They were just connected and sitting there. After 10 minutes of being powered and sitting idle, we can see the reading on our measuring tool. The Carluex is at around 40 degrees. Ottocast Cube with the most, 48 degrees. Ottocast Mini at 40 degrees. And the non-branded one is at 42 degrees, which isn't too bad. Even at this stage, you could already see differences in how the heat was spreading across the casing. Carluex concentrated heat in this one specific area, while Ottocast Cube distributed it more evenly across the whole body being this small. Heat distribution of Ottocast Mini and the non-branded Chinese one isn't too bad either. Then, at the 20 minutes mark, the Carluex remained almost the same at 40.9 degrees. Ottocast Cube increased to more than 49, Chinese one remained the same, and finally, the Ottocast Mini increased a bit to 41 degrees Celsius. After that, we moved into longer-term testing. This meant leaving each adapter powered and operating for roughly an hour. During that time, we connected and disconnected CarPlay, navigated menus, let the system sit idle, and generally simulated real-world usage. This is where things started to get more interesting. During a regular usage pattern, all the adapters were at room temperature. After 10 minutes running continuously, the Carluex shows kind of the same graph as idle. It gradually went to 40 degrees from 28, which is understandable, as it's an AI box and runs the whole Android system inside. So even when it sits idle, the system still runs. Then the Ottocast Cube was the hottest. Right after plugging in, the temperature started to spike, and after 10 minutes, it went from 30 degrees to 44 degrees. And yeah, we faced a connection drop at around the 5 minutes mark when the temperature was 41 degrees. The Chinese one from AliExpress gave an unexpected result. It was literally the coolest one. The temperature didn't spike like the Ottocast Cube, and in 10 minutes, it went to about 37-38 from 29.5 degrees. Finally, the Ottocast Mini also showed stability with 29.5 degrees right after plugging in, and gradually climbing to 41 degrees in 10 minutes. Once that hour-long test was done, we powered everything down and started tracking cool-down behavior. This is something that often gets overlooked, but it tells you a lot about how heat is being stored internally. Some adapters dropped temperature fairly quickly, while others stayed warm for much longer. Like 5 minutes after plugging them out, the Carluex came down to 33.5. Ottocast Cube cooled down a bit more at 32.5, the non-branded one at 30.5, and finally, the Ottocast Mini being the fastest to cool down at 29 degrees. At the 10-minute mark, we can see all of them almost came down to room temperature. The Carluex is a bit higher at more than 28 degrees, Ottocast Cube, and the non-branded one at around 25 to 26, while the Ottocast Mini at 26 degrees. So even though the heat dissipation of the Carluex is better than anyone, but it cools down slowly. What's worth noting here is that size and materials don't always behave the way you'd expect. One of the larger adapters, which you might assume would stay cooler, actually retained heat longer over time. Meanwhile, one of the smaller units managed to stabilize surprisingly well, likely due to how the casing distributes heat rather than trapping it in one spot. When we look at the overall thermal behavior across all the tests, the adapter that stayed the most stable over time was the Carluex Pro Plus 2. The reason's also very clear. It's the largest unit here, but more importantly, it has a dedicated vent underneath, which gives the heat somewhere to go instead of letting it build up inside the casing. It didn't post the lowest idle number right out of the gate, but what stood out was how little it crept over time. From the initial idle reading through the 10 and 20-minute marks, it basically plateaued around the low 40s, and even in real-world use, it climbed in a very predictable, controlled way. Right behind it was the Ottocast Mini, which started cooler at idle and stayed fairly consistent, even though it's less than half the size of the Carluex. But yeah, it did show a bit more rise once we moved into real-world usage. On the other end of the scale, the Ottocast Cube clearly ran the hottest overall. It posted the highest idle temperatures, continued creeping upward over time, and in real-world use it not only climbed faster, but also dropped connection around the 5-minute mark, which lines up with what we were seeing thermally. It did cool down relatively quickly once unplugged, but during operation, especially in sustained use, it was carrying more heat than the others, which is something to keep in mind for hotter cabins or longer drives. The one from AliExpress landed pretty much where we expected it to. It sat in the middle throughout most of the tests, peaking around 37 to 38 degrees in real-world use and cooling back down to the mid-20s within about 10 minutes. It definitely has better heat buildup management during real-world use. The bigger takeaway here is that thermal performance isn't just about peak temperature. It's about how fast heat builds, whether it stabilizes, and how efficiently it can shed that heat afterward. And once you factor all of that in, the adapters with slightly larger casings and better heat distribution clearly have an advantage, especially if you're driving daily or living in a hotter climate. That's really what this test was about. Not declaring a single winner, but understanding which adapters are more likely to stay stable long-term based on how they handle heat. Hope you liked the video, and we'll see you next time.